Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel and to a couple of scattered days in my life as a literary translator. This is my last week at home in the US before going back to Seoul, and I have some traveling planned to see some friends and also some projects that I'm working on, so it should be a couple of fun and productive days for y'all. Before anything else, I wanted to talk to you guys about my translation process because I've been getting some questions about it on my sort of translation vlogs and videos, and I thought it was a really good question and something that I thought about a lot as well before I started translating, and so I just kind of wanted to walk you through how I sort of translate a story or a work of Korean literature into English. First thing I want to mention, I talk about him all the time, but Anton Her has a website, and on his blog he has sort of his own translation process, and he's detailed how he works through tons of professional contracts a year to get, almost like 10 books published, even more maybe in a year. He's absolutely incredible, and I learned a ton from that blog post when I first got started, and I think that's a good place to start. And also, if you're curious about the industry works and how literary translators get paid, or sort of what the job entails, check out my last translation vlog because I talked a lot about that at the beginning. But in terms of the actual craft itself, in some ways it's really simple, and in other ways it kind of is a ton of little steps that you have to go through to get to a finished product, and it does take quite a while. The first step for me is to choose a project, and that happens in sort of two ways. Number one, I either choose the work I want to translate on my own, or number two, I get asked by a Korean publisher to do a sample for them so that they can send that out to English publishers and see what interest there is in the market. When it comes to doing it myself, the first thing I'll do is usually after reading a bit of the story or the book, or maybe even the whole thing, I'll reach out to the Korean publisher and ask if the rights are still available. I talked about this in my last vlog, but basically what that means is just asking if there's any other translator working on this at the moment. And sometimes they will say no, which means that other translators are already working on it, or it might have been published even, or at least contracted or something. And other times they will say yes, they are available, in which case the book probably hasn't been translated, or at least has not been contracted, so you can work on your own sample for it. And I keep using the word sample because basically we never translate full text in their whole length from the beginning. We sort of do usually like anywhere from 30 to 100 page samples that you send out to then publishers and say, hey, this is what the book looks like, this is an excerpt or a couple of short stories, and then they will pick it up and ask you to do the whole book, and this saves everyone in general a ton of time. And I think this is something I really wish I'd known at the beginning. I didn't necessarily translate a full work, but I do think it would have been really useful to know because I felt really daunted by the whole industry. So once I check that the rights are available, I'll usually go and read the text again, specifically looking for either excerpts or short stories if it's a collection that I want to translate and that I feel like are the most powerful and say the most within the collection or the book. And while I do that first read or reread, I'll usually be taking notes for a future synopsis or pitch. So what that is another really important component of the email that you send out to English publishers. And basically it's a slightly detailed summary of the work as well as its relevance in Korea in my case, and also the author's bio and qualifications, your bio and qualifications, and sort of why you think it'll do well in the English language market, aka if there are books that you think it's similar to and the audiences would enjoy both. So in some ways it's what goes in like a query letter, right? Or like whatever goes into like a marketing deck for a product. And since that's already necessary for every work I'm translating anyway, I like to take notes of major plot points, characters, just general tone and theme, and sort of write down my ideas as I'm reading so that I can save myself some time at the end. So I'll gather my notes for that and then I'll actually start translating. And this is honestly the part I enjoy the most. I basically have the Korean version open either on my laptop or the physical book, and then I sort of open a Google Doc and I just start translating in the way that it comes to me. What I found is that initially I'm pretty slow because I'm trying to think of how I can sort of create the tone of the original piece and also capture the voice of the character or narrator. But once that is formed within probably the first chapter, translating becomes a lot easier and it goes a lot faster. And with that first draft, I'm honestly pretty lenient with myself. I'll leave in things that I know are pretty clunky but that contain all of the things of the original, or I'll leave like place names or certain things like that in the Korean language if I'm just not sure how I want to translate them. Or honestly, what I do most often is I will highlight things and add comments to the side of like other phrases I could use or other sayings or idioms I could use, or even just put like or a ton of question marks because I have no idea how to fix it in that moment. And this is all to flag it for my later self when I go through that second draft. These are the sentences I really want to focus on. And I feel like it's really important to say that as a translator, I rely on like Papago or Google Translate or like word reference and things like that. What I'll usually do is look up the definition in Korean and then look up sort of like the suggested translations online and then choose what I think is fitting. Sometimes I don't even use the suggested translations at all because I don't think that's what the word is doing in the original text. Other times the suggested translations are very helpful. I kind of go in between, but it's more just like more information for you to have to know what certain words mean or what the nuances might be in this case. And worst case scenario, I'm also very lucky because I am of Korean heritage, and so I'll just ask my parents, you know, what is this word doing? How is this description being used? Is it sort of a sarcastic tone? Is it like a positive or negative spin or connotation? Whatever. And then obviously you have to make choices about how you're going to translate those things, but I think that is where a lot of the translator's voice comes in and your sort of individual choice and color comes into the text. And so I try to enjoy that as much as possible, even though it can be really stressful. And yeah, like I mentioned with the first draft, I tend to be pretty generous and just kind of like play around and leave suggestions for myself, leave options for my later self when I go through it and edit it. So after I do my initial draft of a sample, it's usually pretty messy. It has a tons of comments all over it, whatever. I'll usually leave it for, I would say, probably like a week or so because I have other projects at different stages. I'm trying to read books and see which ones I might translate. I'm trying to sell or sort of like submit my other ones to journals and stuff. And so I'll leave it for a tiny bit and then I'll come back. And what I do then is I open a whole nother doc that serves as sort of my second draft and honestly my first sort of really working draft. And I'll go through every sentence and sort of refine it and really treat it as if I'm reading like a English language story to make sure that it flows really smoothly and there's a cohesive voice behind it and it feels interesting even to read because sentences create a lot of suspense. And as I'm doing, one of the big tips I have is to read your sentences aloud. Honestly, I would do this even for English language essays and text. But if you read your things aloud, you can really tell what things sound a little clunky or what phrases might be missing, like a to or a from or an about or whatever, just little words that will make the rhythm flow a lot more smoothly and not trip up your reader. And so whenever I'm stuck, that's what I'll usually do. And after I go through the whole sample this way, I'll still leave certain things highlighted or again, like certain comments, much less this time probably, but at least a couple throughout the whole document so that I can flag them for next time, or I'll have a second reader look at it. And I think this is really important. As for me, I really need to shout out my boyfriend Nick because he actually does so much for me in terms of proofreading and kind of going through that second draft and letting me know what he thinks sounds clunky or sort of other suggestions he has. And I'm really lucky because he happens to be a really great writer, and so I get a lot of inspiration from him and also just like notes on how to make things smoother and sort of read well. And he also tells me if he thinks the story is fun and if it's worth sort of sharing with a lot of people and trying to market and things like that. So I think finding someone who you can trust and also who you trust as a writer, I think is really important, and getting their feedback on that sort of second draft is going to be super, super helpful. And after that, it's honestly tiny little edits on like the sentence level to make things more smooth, or sometimes going back to the original text and being like, does this actually align? Has my translation steered too far maybe? But at that point, it's all about individual sentences, not the general sample as a whole. And I feel like the most important thing to mention is, like writing, you will never be happy with your translation. Like, I have truly felt this so many times, but there are so many tiny little words you could change. You could get in your head that it's too close to the original, too far from the original. No matter what, it will not be perfect. And I think I'm getting better and better at just accepting that it's not perfect, but it's good enough. And I have poured my heart into it. And I really think it's a compelling story. And I'll just send it off in that form. And that's when it's usually gone through, I would say, probably for me, like 3 to 4 rounds of edits. And yeah, and that's when I'm done with my sample. And I will either send it off to the Korean publisher that has sponsored it for me, or I will submit stories to journals. I haven't yet actually directly emailed English publishers, but I'm really hoping to start to do that this year, and then I'll usually just hop to my next translation, and I kind of am juggling these balls in the air trying to make sure that one lands. So it's definitely not easy. It's not necessarily the most simple job in the world, but I really enjoy it, and especially the actual feeling of that initial translation when I have the Korean text and then I'm rewriting it in English in my own words or in my head. I feel like that is so fun. It feels almost like a puzzle, but also like art, and it feels like creation, and it's just so rejuvenating for me, and I get into the flow very easily with translation, and I find it very soothing and rewarding, and I think that's why I love this job and why I hope to keep doing it and sort of make a name for myself within it. And yeah, that was a very long ramble about translation, but I hope you guys enjoyed. It's super cool to see that a lot of people are into translated lit and also just like translation as a whole, and I feel like even though it's somewhat new to me as well, hopefully we can like figure it out together and learn more together. I think it's such a cool industry, and there's so many cool books coming out of it. On that note, I think I'm going to do another hour of translating or so I'm going to get to that now, but let me know if you have any questions. I would definitely be willing to talk more about this and answer your questions in the comments or in other videos. So yeah, just let me know down below.
You stay there.
In the mug today is some coffee with some milk a la my dad. Thank you, King. Also, excuse the fact that I'm wearing the exact same shirt that I was earlier in this video. All my other clothes are packed up to go back to Seoul now. And also, I just really love this top. It's for a baseball team in my local area that I actually went to a couple of their games when I was younger. Yeah, one of the best thrift finds of this month for sure. I want to tell you guys about some books that I found on my New York trip. As you saw, I visited a lot of independent bookstores, and in particular, 3 Lives and Company and 192 Books had such a good selection of like translated lit, of smaller presses, of just really exciting new books and authors that I haven't heard of but that just looked great. And so as y'all probably saw, the one book that I actually picked up was The Years by Annie Arnaud. I got this at 3 Lives and Company, and they gave me this exquisite bookmark. It's such a beautiful bookstore in the West Village. But I talked about this in my sort of like end of year reading list video, and I'm just getting to it now. But Annie Arnaud is a French writer who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2022, and she's really famous for her memoirs and just sort of her sharp writing about her own life and like sort of the changing culture of the times. And it seems like a lot of people consider this like her best work. It covers like 6 decades in France, and I think it weaves in and out of her life as well as sort of like the cultural happenings in France at the time. And what really convinced me to get it was the first couple of pages. The first line of the book is all the images will disappear. And then it has like 3 to 5 pages of like incredibly specific images and words and all these things that immediately feel like little references, that they just place you in this world so concretely. All these little details that are both very mundane and incredibly unique and special. And the flow of the writing seems really beautiful. It was translated by Alison L. Strayer, and it just already seems really, really strong. And so I'm really excited to finally get to this one. The 2 other books that I really wanted to get but didn't for just like space in my luggage and also my wallet were The Door by Magda Sasbo and Chilean Poet by Alejandro Zambra. I've never read either of these authors before, but I've seen their books sort of floating around in bookstores in the booktube space, and I'm really excited for them. Particularly Saba, I know she's a really important Hungarian writer, and people seem to really love her stuff, especially people with my taste in books as well. Apparently The Door explores the complex relationship between a writer and her housekeeper, Emerence, and sort of like the breakdown and sort of the weird attachment that forms between them, and then the breakdown of that relationship or something like that. And it seems really similar to a lot of Piñero's writing, who, as you guys probably know by now, I talk about all the time. I absolutely love her writing, and so I thought this would be really interesting, and I think I might get it when I go back to Seoul. And I really don't know much about Chilean Poet, but I do think it's about like fathers and sons and family and sort of reconciliation and the importance and meaning of poetry and things like that, which are all themes that I absolutely love. And it has a 4.4 on Goodreads with 18,000 reviews, which I think is actually so impressive. Not that I should be so beholden to the Goodreads ratings, but I do think that is so crazy, so I'm really excited to read this one as well. So those are the books I sort of got, or at least added to my list after my New York trip. But I also wanted to talk to you guys about something that I found out during that trip. Basically, I heard back from a mentorship/fellowship I'd applied to for translation at the end of last year. If you guys watch my sort of like work days in a literary translator life vlog, you guys would have heard about it. But basically, I got word back that I did not end up getting the mentorship this year. Of course, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed, but I thought this was a good sort of excuse to talk about rejection a little bit at the end of this video here. I'm sure anyone who works in any sort of creative field will be able to tell you this, but you truly get rejected all the time as a writer and translator. Everything from journals to book pitches and query letters to getting agents or getting into programs. Just everything you can think of that exists in the life of being a writer or translator is a possibility for more rejection. And as someone who's been writing since like late high school and then translating for like the past 2 years, I've really had my fair share of all sorts of rejections. I feel like that's super normal. I feel like it'd be a lot to expect someone to not be affected by those things. But of course, you know, the famous story that like, you know, J.K. Rowling got rejected like 100 something times before finally getting Harry Potter signed. There's stories like this for every basically iconic book series or sort of like very famous writer. And those are really helpful in just realizing that rejection is such a natural part of creating and like constantly submitting your stuff and things like that. But actually what's helped me the most is a couple of years ago, I found out about someone who was trying to get 100 rejections in 1 year. And their whole idea is that they just wanted to really familiarize themselves with the feeling of failure, quote unquote, but also just to prove that that's not what matters. What matters is that you're actually putting yourself out there and constantly trying new things, writing new things, submitting new things. And so this person literally set a resolution frustration of getting 100 rejections and just decided to submit to probably over 100 places. And I remember they said at the end they'd hit like, 80 something rejections and then like, I would say like 15 or something acceptances, which if you just saw the acceptances part, it's so impressive, so incredible, but you don't hear about those 85 rejections that happen, that people don't really talk about. And although I haven't been doing this for like super long, I do think that in my own experience that's held true as well. I feel like I get like one acceptance for every like 5 rejections, if not more. I even have a separate folder in my email for just rejections, and I like seeing them kind of accumulate because after hearing about that person's experience, it's really changed my mindset on rejection. And now I think of it as sort of an accomplishment as well, because it means that I actually submitted something and that someone actually took time to read my thing, and hopefully the rejection also allows you to kind of become better and realize what people want and what people don't want. So yeah, obviously it's, very idealistic and it's super normal. I still feel very disappointed and like down about myself at times, but I do think that mindset shift has helped me so much, and it's just reminded me that the best thing about being a creative in whatever field or just being a writer or translator is that you're actually writing and translating and getting your stuff out there, and that constantly facing sort of these rejections or barriers is what will make that publication or debut just first of all better quality, but also so much more exciting and meaningful to your life, and no one gets accepted to everything. So yeah, I feel like a lot of accomplished writers and translators will talk about this, and it's harder to take them seriously sometimes because you're already so famous, like of course you can talk about it easily now, but I think it's also important for us to talk about as people who are trying to break into the field as emerging writers or translators, that this is very normal and it's okay, and it's actually exciting in its own right that we are submitting our work to places and taking ourselves seriously. So yeah, if anyone's in a similar boat, I hope that can kind of give some encouragement or just some comfort to you guys as well. With that, I think I'm going to wrap up this video here. This is my sort of last vlog from home. I'll be back in Seoul next week and we'll have a lot of fun like bookish lifestyle fashion content from there. But honestly, this has been sort of like the most restful and like needed sort of break, even though I'm still working and stuff. It's just being in the suburbs, seeing my hometown friends and family, and even just getting to travel within the US has been really nice. So I think I'm feeling really rejuvenated for the year, for my time back in Seoul, and I will catch you guys there very soon. Thanks for watching. Bye!